is Rabbanit Sarna and Rabbi David Wolkenfeld. Shalom and welcome to the Straw Hat. We're the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox synagogue in the beautiful Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. This week's episode is going to have two different parts. First, we're going to be interviewing Rabbanit Sara Wolkenfeld, who is the director of the Adam R. Straus Memorial Mikvah, and we'll be talking with her about why it's important that we have a mikvah, what it takes to keep our mikvah up and running, what's special about the Anshe Shalom mikvah. It's a huge privilege that our synagogue has a mikvah, and we're so grateful to all that Rabbanit Sara Wolkenfeld does in order to keep it up and running. And in our second part of this episode, Rabbi Wolkenfeld and I will be introducing one of the gilyonot, one of the sheets prepared on the parsha by Professor Nechama Leibowitz, which are recently, as of this week, available on Sefaria for public consumption. And we'll be talking about kind of the genre of her gilyonot, and we'll be using one to discuss respect for the elderly, which is one of the themes, one of the mitzvot in this week's parsha. We're here today with Rabbanit Sara Wolkenfeld, the director of our mikvah, but also she has a day job where she's the director of education at Sefaria. So we're mostly going to talk about our mikvah. This is going to be kind of a special mikvah-focused episode of the Straw Hat. But do you want to say anything about your day job first before we get going?
Sure. I'm Director of Education at Sefaria. Sefaria.org is an online platform for learning Jewish texts. We're building the future of Torah by creating open access to an open source platform that has the vast majority of the Jewish canon as much as possible, both in Hebrew and in translation. It's a very exciting project to work on. And if it's okay, I'll just mention that the newest addition to Sefaria's library is a complete collection of the gilyonot, the sheets, the source sheets of Nechama Leibowitz, a very famous modern scholar of Torah, of parsha nut, really. She did an amazing job collecting different mefarshim, different commentaries on each parsha and using those to answer really insightful and incisive questions that she collected. She herself compiled sheets and would mimeograph them and send them to her students, mail them to her students, and they would send them back. She was famous for her red pen markings on their answers. And we've preserved actually on our site both the originals, you can see photos of the originals, as well as completely digitized versions with many of them in translation. So I hope that after you listen to this podcast, you'll all check that out.
The shul actually has a complete collection of the mimeographed gilyonot of Nechama Leibowitz.
Where?
In the library. There are binders of them in the library.
Wow,
they're not the most user-friendly, but it's really cool that we have them. Rabbi Paul Sager picked them up one year when he was a student in Israel. Picked up a complete set and he gave them to the shul. We also have her the printed version that was translated into English some years ago, and now everyone has the Sefaria version. So that's a really exciting development for everyone who loves Torah. So.
Yeah, the binders are for Shabbos.
Yeah.
So Sarah, you're our mikvah director. What makes a person qualified to be a mikvah director? What's the education involved in that?
I have a diverse background, I would say, in working with different mikvah. Really, it's a sideline that I came to a little bit coincidentally. I was in a program to learn Gemara and Halacha more broadly, and one of the years of that education was focused on Hilchot Nida, on the laws that relate to women using the mikvah. And in that context, in the context of being a participant in that program at the Drisha Institute, the program was called the Scholars Circle. It sadly no longer exists. But when it did, in that context, I began to work as an intern at a synagogue in Houston, Texas, called United Orthodox Synagogues. And under the mentorship of Rabbi Barry Gelman, I began to work with the mikvah attendants in that shul, really with the goal of revamping their mikvah a little bit, revamping their mikvah practices a little bit, bringing all the attendants together for some conversations about what it would mean to be an attendant in the context of their mikvah and what that kind of halachic observance could and should look like in their community. And through that work, I first of all became very interested in the topic of education for mikvah attendants as well as mikvah users, which is something that I was already doing. And I began doing some work with other synagogues as well. As when I went as a scholar in residence in different shul communities, I would often speak either to the mikvah attendants specifically and or to the women or even the women and men of the community about mikvah practice, about related halachot, about sexuality and intimacy. I also did some of that speaking on college campuses. We worked at Princeton for 5 years before we came to Chicago. And even though I would say the vast, vast majority of our constituency there were not themselves mikveh users. They were very interested in learning about sexuality and intimacy and
I'm shocked to hear.
Yeah, shocked, right? But it was interesting to me that they were really interested in mikveh as seeing how that fit into a larger Jewish view of family life, I would say.
I actually remember you teaching about that when I was a student at Drisha in, I think, 2012. Sophie maybe was a baby then.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember there being an infant involved in this. You taught our like crew of college students about a many-part series on sex and sexuality also.
Yeah, I gave them 2 topics to choose between. I think one was about tzedakah and the other was about sexuality, and they chose the sexuality one. Shocker, right?
I remember you I think taught like a version of that class here in Chicago our first winter after we moved here. It was a very well-attended class, and I think that spring the Purim Spiel had a line of, following up on the success of her class on the philosophy of sexuality. The next class will be more classes on philosophy, because it was...
Yes, because that's really what people
that was the job.
Yes. So now we understand a little bit how you're qualified to be the director of a mikvah. What makes you different than a yoetzet? Are you a yoetzet? What is a yoetzet?
I am not a yoetzet because I was never kind of in the right place at the right time to attend the yoetzet program, which is a program that first existed in Israel. I should say it still exists in Israel. Now they have an American program as well, where Americans are encouraged to participate long distance. I think there's some travel involved. But at the time that I was in yeshiva learning these halachot, I was living in America for all sorts of reasons and was not able to be there to attend the Israeli program. And by the time I was in a position to consider it, I had already spent, we'll call it basically a year and a half, learning Hilchot Nida. I was already teaching those halachot, so it didn't feel like the best and most impactful use of my yeshiva time. It is an amazing program. Many communities have yoetzot. Ours does not.
What does a yoetzet do when she's in a community, let's say?
I think it depends on the community, but generally speaking, the yoetzet will maybe consult for the mikvah, will answer questions for women in the community related to Hilchot Nida, and will do general educational programs about those laws. So we're, I think, very fortunate in our community. I've been here for a number of years directing the mikvah in the community. I answer many questions about Hilchot Nida. I do educational programming, and now we have you, Rabbanit Sarna. So our community is very well served by the resources that we have. But there are certainly communities for whom having yoetzet has been transformational.
For sure.
And just to flesh that out, it's a program of the Nishmat Institute in Jerusalem, with the American branch also under the directorship of Nishmat as well. So it's a proprietary trademarked title.
Yes, that's right. Not just anyone can be a yoetzet, only if you attend Nishmat officially.
Correct. And they have a hotline and people call, and it's really, in Israel even, it's been transformational in terms of giving kind of women anywhere a phone number to call when they have a question, and that they can feel totally comfortable calling because they know it's going to be a woman who will answer in a knowledgeable and non-judgmental way, which I think feels really wonderful and empowering for women.
And they have a website also, which is, somewhat useful in many situations, and people should know about. And you can Google it. I forget the exact website, but they have a website where they answer a lot of questions as well.
.org.
Yeah, something like that.
But I do recommend not always just Googling halachic questions when you have them.
You should not ask Rabbi Google to answer your questions. But for informational articles, I think that their website is helpful.
Yes, definitely. But I know that you get, and over the years here, you've gotten many types of questions relating to Hilchot Nida. Do you want to share a little bit about what that's been like for you?
It's really an amazing thing, because I think that, as you mentioned, people are often, first of all, they're often happy to find a woman on the other end of the phone when they have these questions. And so I get calls really from, maybe not all over the world, but I get calls from all over America and from Israel as well. And usually it's women who just got my number from a friend or a friend of a friend, or they got it off the shul website. There are also people in the community who know me who ask me questions, but I get a lot of questions from people who I don't know, which is really a fascinating thing. I think that it's also appealing often to ask questions anonymously, so women will contact me in that regard as well. And then questions from people within the community. I also get questions from brides that I have taught over the years, and their friends and their friends' friends. So that's really, I think, that's been a very powerful piece of my work is that I teach women and men who are engaged, and then they ask me questions maybe before their wedding and maybe after their wedding, and then I will continue to get questions from them through their, so far I would say, first, second, and third children. And that's an amazing feeling to be able to accompany people on that journey for so long.
And in broad strokes, can you characterize the types of questions?
The questions are really very diverse. Everything from I thought I was supposed to go to the mikveh tonight, and now I'm not so sure for the following reasons, to I'm trying to get pregnant, or I'm trying not to get pregnant, or I want to know if this custom that I heard about from my sister-in-law is something that I should also be doing.
More common than anyone would imagine.
Lots and lots of different types of questions. And you really never know who will ask you what kind of question. That's a very important take-home message for me, that there are women who maybe go to the mikveh sometimes, and it's not always a part of their life, but they might have decided that it should be a part of their life right now, and so they'll ask me a halachic question. I also get a lot of questions that are not actually halachic questions, in the sense that their answers are not really bounded by halakha. Like, I'm going to go to the mikveh because it is my birthday, and I'd like to know, should I do X, Y, and Z, or how should this play out? So that's not a technically halachic question in the sense that there are no halachot about going to the mikveh on your birthday. And yet it's important to take those questions seriously and answer them in a way that makes the person feel that their spirituality in that moment is being valued and that they can have a meaningful experience at our mikveh.
Maybe this is a good time to pivot to a description of our mikveh and what makes it special. How is it different from some other mikvahot that exist in the country, and particularly as pertains to women using the mikveh and men using the mikveh for a diverse range of motivations?
The Straus Memorial Mikvah is an Orthodox mikvah that's open to the broader community. We adhere to Orthodox standards for the kashrut of our mikvah, for practices in our mikvah. We put out prayers that are consistent with Orthodox practice and norms, and the advice that we dispense is consistent with Orthodox practice, Orthodox halakha. At the same time, we want to be open to the community that's around us, which is a diverse community, not just the community that's immediately in our proximity, but being the closest mikveh to downtown Chicago, we also want to be open to the many visitors who pass through our community for all sorts of reasons. And so we're maybe a little bit different in the sense that we don't ask women why they're coming to the mikveh. We don't ask them to share more information than they want to share. The same is true for men, men who use our mikveh. We don't push women towards any particular halachic practice. We don't ask them, have they done any kind of checking or anything like that. We want to make women feel comfortable in using the mikveh. We don't insist on checking women's bodies before they go into the mikveh. That's a very common practice at mikvahot, that the mikveh attendant will say, I need to check your nails, I need to check your back, we offer to check women, but we don't want to look at any part of a woman's body that she doesn't want looked at. We don't want to touch any part of a woman's body that she doesn't want touched. And so we feel strongly about having the desire to use the mikveh and the crafting of the experience of the mikveh come from the woman who's immersing.
And while we're talking about mikveh experience, so meaning on a technical halachic level, a mikveh could be a hole in the ground filled with rainwater, like just a glorified large puddle could be a mikveh. So our mikveh is not that. Why not?
I think for the same reason that you could pray anywhere, but you have preferences about where you'd like to pray and what you'd like that space to be like. Our mikveh is an opportunity for a woman to have a religious experience, and we want the setting to reflect that. So it needs to be a place that women feel comfortable. Women often feel very vulnerable in the mikveh, and for obvious reasons, they're taking off all their clothing, they're coming into a space that maybe is not a space that they regularly inhabit. It's a religious space, which feels more comfortable for some and less comfortable for others, and maybe more comfortable for some at different times in their lives and less comfortable at other times. Women come to the mikveh for all sorts of reasons. They may be grappling with infertility. They may be experiencing a loss.
It might be their birthday.
It might be their birthday. They might be going through menopause or perimenopause. They might be coming after the birth of a child. They might be coming after the birth of their last child. They they might be coming in anticipation of the birth of a child. And we want to create an environment that supports all of those possibilities and makes women feel welcome and comfortable in all of those mental places that they are.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned attendants before. Can you say something about the attendants? Who are the attendants? How does one become an attendant? Do you have all the attendants you need? Or are you looking for more?
And if I'm going to the mikvah, do I need an attendant?
Yes. So we are very fortunate that our mikvah is staffed by volunteer attendants who give generously of their time so that our community can have its own mikvah. And these are women who are generally living within the community, although we have had attendants from outside of the ASBI community, women who just feel that our mikvah is such an important addition to the Chicago community that they want to be able to support our mikvah. We have volunteers who are not attendants as well, some of whom live in our community and some of whom do not, who do things like answering email and scheduling mikvah attendance and scheduling appointments, and those are all important contributions as well that I want to recognize. Our attendants are women who either are or have been mikvah users themselves who want to give back to the community, and they volunteer typically between 1 and 3 nights a month to be available to anyone who wants to use the mikvah on that night. We are always looking for more volunteer attendants. We have a constant cycle, women who are more available one month and less available another month, women who have a new baby and can't make it out for a few months, women who are traveling, and so we're always looking for more attendants. Anyone who's interested should please get in contact with me. Part of my role as mikvah director is to run trainings for new attendants, to recruit and run trainings for new attendants, and we have a training, God willing, coming up in the next couple of weeks. So if you'd like to get in on that, please get in touch with me.
I'm wondering why it's actually important that there be a mikvah in Lakeview. Meaning, you said before, our mikvah is the closest one to downtown, but I don't know if that's true. I think Lake Michigan is probably closer to downtown than our mikvah, and one could theoretically use Lake Michigan as a mikvah. It'd be very cold and very public.
Many months of the year I would not recommend that, but I know there are people who are into that.
But why? Meaning there's a mikvah in West Rogers Park, there's mikvah in Skokie. Why does our community actually need to have a mikvah?
Maybe this is also a good time to say that we freak out when our mikvah temperature drops below about 88 degrees. So if you're looking for a warm experience, that's the place to be. I think it is very important both for the community here in Lakeview and also for the broader Chicago community. For the community here in Lakeview, it's important to have a mikvah that is close by, that is walking distance for those who are going to use the mikvah on Friday nights, on holidays, or just at a time when it would be inconvenient to drive. Okay, not very far, but I'm going to say it's at least 20, 25 minutes to drive to the nearest mikvah, not counting Lake Michigan. And so that's really important. And I think that for the continued growth of our community, it's important when people look to move to a community, they look at ASBI, and we can honestly say that we have everything that one needs for an Orthodox lifestyle here in Lakeview. Part of that certainly is having access to a local mikvah. More broadly, in terms of the larger Chicagoland Jewish community, I think that our mikvah contributes something very important to the larger landscape because of the component that I mentioned earlier about having a mikvah that is designed to support Orthodox halakha, but is open to the broader community. There are many women who have come to use our mikvah over the years who have told me that this is the first mikvah where they feel really comfortable coming to the mikvah. That this is the first mikvah where they feel welcomed, despite whatever external indicator it is that would make them feel uncomfortable at another mikvah. There are women who have come to our mikvah and have told me that this is the first time they've ever used a mikvah because they didn't feel that they would be welcome at another mikvah. And our mikvah, we do put a lot of thought. I think part of this volunteer group of attendants, one piece of that is not just that the women are attending, but because they're volunteering, they feel really invested. And our volunteers do things like say, we really need to have fragrance-free products in our mikvah because the shampoo and conditioner need to be available to women who have allergies, and they'll provide that. We have attendants who say, our blow dryers are kind of out of date. I'd like to buy new ones and replace them for the mikvah. We have attendants who say, what would be really nice? It would be really nice if we had candles in more places in our mikvah so that we could have a better ambiance. I think that you get that when you have the kind of investment that our volunteers have in the mikvah, and that's something that maybe not every mikvah has, and that we contribute to the larger landscape of the Chicago community.
Let's talk about some common misconceptions that people have about mikvahs. So the first question that I get a lot is it clean? Is the water clean?
Yes, the water is clean. You can think of a mikvah as I tell people, either a small pool or a sort of medium-sized jacuzzi, but without the jets. Our mikvah is... it's chlorinated. It's brominated, technically, but that's very similar to chlorine. So the water is clean. We also have it serviced by a pool company. And someday I'd love to find out what Mike the pool guy thinks is going on in our mikvah. Maybe we should interview him. But he services our pool regularly and cleans it. And the mikvah attendants are provided with a little kind of water gun-like thing that we can use to pull anything out of the water that falls in there that shouldn't be there. But yes, our mikvah is clean.
And how is our human-sized mikvah connected or in any way related? We have another mikvah, which is our kelim mikvah. Oh, yeah. We have a mikvah for vessels.
We do, and I don't know the logistics of the piping for the kelim mikvah actually as well as I do for the...
Do you want to chime in?
It's the same board.
Right?
The same pit of rainwater is what animates. Sort of is beneath, connected to the immersion pit and the. So both immersion, I guess the immersion pit for forks and the one for humans is filtered city water that's replenished and cleaned, and they each.
I would say the kelim mikvah is cleaned occasionally.
Kelim mikvah is cleaned. No, the water though is not. The water is also city water that you're putting.
It's city water, but it's been there for a few months, as opposed to the.
It's not filtered regularly.
So this is a great time to mention that the mikvah committee, which is another volunteer opportunity, we have a mikvah committee that helps me in governing the mikvah and figuring out where we can make improvements. And the mikvah committee is currently contemplating some improvements to the kelim mikvah, which include draining it and refilling it. And yes, you do not have to shower after you use the mikvah. That's your own choice. It depends on whether or not you like the smell of pools. But you should probably wash your dishes after you immerse them in the kelim mikvah. And that is adjacent to our mikvah. It's open to all during the day. There's a code that you can get from the shul office to access that room. And we leave it open only during the daytime hours so that at night when women are using our person mikvah, they won't be distracted by the sounds from
dishes
the dish
and silverware
mikvah
being jostled in the next room.
Exactly, but it is immediately adjacent to. It is the same pit, and like our mikvah always needs more upkeep.
I think we've been using this word pit and animates the mikvah.
Yeah.
Why don't do one of you want to say more
Sure,
about what that means?
Yes. The halachic force of a mikvah, the effectiveness of the mikvah comes from either a mayim chayim, a spring, a natural spring that bubbles up from the ground. We don't have one here in our not in ours. There's none in our site, or it can be rainwater that has been collected and contained in one location without ever having been drawn into a bucket or in any other type of receptacle. So we have collected rainwater pits the rain is collected once every few years, actually, from the roof of the mikveh. It goes directly into the pits without ever being collected in any way, being drawn in any way, in a very sort of carefully designed collection process. And then that water is good to go, and it's there in those pits. And then those pits of rainwater are touching
the Hebrew word is hashaka.
They're kissing.
Yes.
The immersion pit, and the immersion pit then can be city water that's filtered and cleaned and warmed and heated and all those things, and a comfortable thing to immerse in, and it's kosher for these ritual purposes because it is touching the rainwater pit, which retains its vitality, through over the years.
Mm-hmm. And if you'd like to get a sense of the impact, I would say, of rainwater on the mikvah. I mean, this is not from a halachic perspective, but if you just want to experience it, you should try being in our mikvah when it's raining.
Oh, yes.
Because it's since we have that pipe there, it's a little bit hard to describe, but it's sort of a metal and it runs down the side of the mikvah. It sounds very dramatic, if you can imagine being sort of inside a tin house while it's raining. So you really have a sense of the presence of rainwater in our mikvah when it is raining.
Just to clarify, right, well, because the pits are already filled, right, that rainwater is diverted into the sewer and it's not being collected, but it still passes through the mikvah on its way to the sewer because that's how it was designed. And it's also just for halachic accuracy, because I think it might be significant, the metal is the casing, but the it's all cement
on the inside.
On the inside, yeah. So the water is not passing through any metal, anything at all. It's just passing through a cement.
But it does sound very dramatic
very loud,
on its way.
I've experienced that too.
So just to round this out and clarify, if you've used our vessel mikvah, our fork mikvah, and you're wondering, is this what the human mikvah is like in terms of cleanliness, heat, experience? The answer to all of the above is no. The answer in terms of its ability to change something from one status to another, let's say it like that, yes, and it draws on the same collection of rainwater, and they're in the same kind of general vicinity within the shul because of that, obviously.
Yes, but we've invested a lot in making the person mikvah a beautiful experience, as was described.
And we are looking forward to investing in our vessel mikvah to make it similarly exciting.
Right. The forks don't complain as much, but I understand there's a value in having that experience also be an aesthetic one.
Yes. What are other common misconceptions, questions you might get about the mikvah?
I think one misconception I touched on earlier, which is that maybe the mikvah is not for me. Maybe I wouldn't be allowed to go to the mikvah. Maybe I don't really belong there.
Like I'm not religious enough to you. I don't deserve. Yeah,
I'm not religious enough, and I would sort of be looked at, askance. Yes, people would not be happy to see me at the mikvah, and that is certainly a misconception at our mikvah, where anyone who wants to immerse is really welcome, and we do our best to, as I mentioned before, help those who are immersing craft the experience that's going to be most meaningful for them.
I think another question that I get a lot from people that I'm teaching about mikvah is the presence of the attendant in general, right? It's very intimidating to be not wearing any clothes around another, let's say, a member of your shul. What can you speak to that experience at all, or why someone maybe should not be intimidated by that?
Sure. Our attendants are there for a few purposes. I think on the most basic level, it's water safety. I think that when you're immersing in a pool of water, it's good to have somebody else on the premises knowing that you're immersing in that pool of water. Our attendants are also there to ensure the overall quality of the experience and to be responsible for the logistical components. So they'll let you into the building, they'll provide you with towels, they'll tell you where everything is, they will collect payment for the immersion. All of those things are really important. On a halachic level, the attendant is there to make sure that your entire body is immersed in the mikvah simultaneously, which is a condition of a kosher immersion, that every part of a woman's body goes under the water simultaneously. Technically, halachically, if a woman were to be able to ensure that without the presence of an attendant, then that could still be considered a kosher immersion. Our attendants are there to ensure the best possible experience. If a woman comes to our mikvah and says, listen, this is going to make me really uncomfortable if you actually watch me immerse, then we are happy to either stay in the room with our back turned or leave the room with the stipulation that the woman should please let us know when she's back in the preparation room, again, for water safety purposes.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned payment. I know people are surprised that they have to pay to use the mikvah. They don't have to pay to come to shacharit, for example, in the shul. Why does mikvah involve payment?
I think you said to me earlier that the mikvah is one of the most expensive things that the shul does, which hadn't really occurred to me, I guess. That we also do earn money, but through this payment. But the mikvah is very expensive. We're essentially running a small pool, or I guess kind of two small pools, one very small pool. And so there's a lot of money that goes into upkeep and repairs and supplies. It's just an expensive thing to run. I guess anyone who's ever owned a pool, which does not include me, would know about that. We have the tablets for the bromine. We have the pool upkeep. Every once in a while, we have repairs that need to be done. We're running sort of a public bathhouse with baths and showers and the heating bill and the hot water.
And
the cleaning. There's a lot of expenses associated with it, and we do our best to keep it as affordable as possible. Also, of course, no one's ever turned away for lack of funds. So someone who's thinking, maybe I thought I didn't belong at the mikveh, but maybe I do, but maybe I can't afford to pay, is certainly welcome to come. When people come and say, I don't have any money on me, we give them information to pay on the shul website, and often they do. And we are open to that. And then, of course, there are people who contribute more to the mikveh because they want to make that opportunity available for others, and we appreciate that very much as well.
Nice. When we have guests on the podcast, we often like to ask them, where can someone find you?
You can find me kind of in the middle of the women's section, sometimes surrounded by some number of our 5 children, and I'm there pretty much every week.
Thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners did as well. Our mikvah is a huge part of, as you've heard, the mikvah is a very important part of the work that we do here at Anshe Shalom, and we're so lucky to have you as the mikvah director. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we just heard that Sefaria has added the gilyonot, the source sheets, the study guides of Nechama Leibowitz to their database. And so we wanted to take advantage. We thought we would learn something from this coming week's parsha.
Parshat Kedoshim.
Parshat Kedoshim from one of these gilyonot, which is now available. In addition to being published in books and other places, it's now on the Sefaria website. So in this week's parsha, one of the many, many mitzvot that are introduced and taught in this week's parsha, we are told, Lifnei Sevat Hakum, one should rise before the aged, and the Dar Pnei Zaken, and you should also show honor to the elderly, to the sage. One of my favorite things about Israel is that instead of just normal signs, let's say normal things, sometimes those signs are quotations from Tanakh, because that's an amazing thing about the revival of the Hebrew language in our day. And so on buses, instead of saying like, give up this seat for people with disabilities or whatever, which is what you'll have on city buses in other countries, you'll have this verse that says, Mipnei Sevat Hakum, put above those bus seats that are meant to be designated for people who are aged. Yes. So the question that then arises, that is discussed in the Talmud and also in the Midrash on this verse, is who is included in this mitzvah? For whom must one rise? So the Sifra says, Sifra is the halachic Midrash on Sefer Vayikra, There's two different kinds of midrash. One kind of midrash, it's called midrash halacha, which this is an example of, where we learn out from, it's part of the process by which we learn how to live based on the Torah. So there's a verse in the Torah, and how does that translate into directive for how to act in the world? And that translation process happens in the midrash halacha. And then sometimes what we normally call like the midrash, or like made popular by the little midrash says, are more like midrash agadah, which are like stories and fan fiction on the Torah. So this is Midrash Halacha. Yes, so it's trying to connect what we do with the verses in the Torah, and exactly. So the opening question, Yachol afilu zaken ashma'ai. What about if there's an old person who's not so impressive in their, doesn't really know that much, and not an unimpressive person despite being old. Talmud Amar zaken. So the second half of the verse says that we should respect the zaken, the sage. Ve'ein zaken ela chacham. And clearly, in the language of the Torah, in the Torah's vocabulary, the word zaken implies that someone is also wise. Shneimar, as it says in Numbers 11, Asfali shivim ish miziknei Yisrael. Moshe gathers together the 70 elders, the 70 sages, to form that prototype of the Sanhedrin, and they are referred to as Ziknei Yisrael, the sages of Israel. And so zaken is a word that implies not just age chronologically, but also wisdom. That's sort of this opening position stated in the Midrash. A second opinion is then introduced. Rabbi Yossi Glili Omer, Yossi Glili says, Ein zaken ela mi shekana chachma. No, a zaken is somebody who has acquired wisdom, which seems similar to that first opinion, but is a subtly different, and we'll sort of tease it out in a moment. But that's his position. And then Isi ben Yehuda says, Mipnei Sevat Hakum afilu kol seva b'mashma. Any old person is included. That's included in this implication of rising before the aged. Doesn't matter if they're wise, if they're not wise. Somebody who reaches that designation of being elderly deserves our respect. You should rise when they walk past. Okay, so then Nechama collected a few sources first for study. So that's one, the Sifra, and then she brings in the Malbim also, who comments on this. And what the Malbim does is tries to take apart these opinions, particularly the two that we've already flagged as seeming very similar. The first opinion brought in the Sifra, and then also the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who both seem to be interpreting this language of Zakin to mean someone who is uniquely wise. So the Malbim says, Dada Tanakama, so the first opinion, it's that actually this whole verse of Lifnei Sevat Hakum Hadarta Pnei Zaken is all just it's just repetitive, and so therefore when it says Hadarta Pnei Zaken, Zaken teaches you what Seva is in the first half of the verse, and it's all just about if you deserve the level of respect that we're discussing if you are wise.
And Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, no, actually the two halves of the verse are teaching you about different things. The verse is Shnei Mishpatim. It says, the Malbim, Ve'rotza lomar sheyichavdu et hachachamim v'yakumu mitneihem v'zeh b'shnei panim, that you should give honor to wise people and stand up before them. And there's two different kinds of wise people. Chacham al yedei seva, so someone who is wise through their old age. Shazkenim asfu chachma al yedei hanisayon v'tol hayamim, that someone who's elderly has gathered wisdom through their life experience, and that's one kind of wisdom. And then there's another kind of wisdom, which is chacham al yedei haruach, someone who is by their spirit, by their nature, smart, wise. Shelifamim yashpia Hashem shafa chochma al ish tzair, that sometimes God overflows a overflow of wisdom towards even a young person. And that person is also called a zaken.
And I am sensitive maybe to that's not necessarily even their nature that makes them, this young person, wise. It's maybe like a special divine grace that even though you don't have to go through those trials and tribulations of life and have those life experiences, somehow God's bounty will select somebody to be given this outsized wisdom even at a young age.
And you certainly meet, at least my experience is that you meet children like that children all children have a certain wisdom and perspective that adults have a lot to learn from, but that there are certain children who are just like, wow. Wise
beyond their years, or just a real maturity that, it seems to be, I guess the Malbim would say that's this ruach that comes from God. So what's really special about Nechama as a teacher, as a scholar, is that she had more than enough command of the Torah commentary literature to have written her own, line by line running commentary on Chumash had she chosen to do so. But her life and career were really focused on being a pedagogue, being a teacher, and really also she was a teacher of teachers. She empowered her students to become, and actually many people who taught me parsha over the years, very impactful teachers of mine who taught me parsha were her real life students in the flesh. And so her these gilyonot, these sheets that she made, that she prepared for students, that she mailed out to students all across the world, they were collected sources. Here we just saw two sources. We collection of the Sifra. She notes there's a parallel, similar passage in the Gemara in Kedushin, and then this passage from the Malbim. And then what she did was she asked some questions for us to answer, to see these sources, to contemplate them, and then to try to answer them, to make sure we understand well, and then to think a little bit deeper.
And originally, people would actually send her in the mail.
Correct.
Sarah mentioned that she would mimeograph these questions and mail them out, and people would send back, and she would correct them with red pen.
Yes.
And so while what remains of her original work are these questions, you actually could probably, if you gathered enough students' responses and her corrections on the responses, you probably could gather what her answers were. But I think it's in some ways purposeful not to publish those. There's another form of commentary which would be kind of more standard, like Rashi, where you actually have to guess. There's entire books written, what's bothering Rashi? Yeah. Whereas with Nechama, and he gives you the answer, and you have to figure out what the question was and what was wrong with the verse, such that Rashi had to come in and explain the solution. Whereas with Nechama, it's really the opposite. You know exactly what's bothering Nechama, but it's on you to come up with your own answer. And in some ways, that preservation of the question has deep roots in the Jewish tradition, meaning the Talmud is full of questions, many of which the Talmud says, take you, I don't know the answers to that. But the questions are preserved because they're these timeless and intense questions. And I think our tradition really does believe that in many ways questions are more powerful than answers, and leaving just questions and up to every generation to find their own, or every student to find their own answers is a very powerful pedagogical tool.
Should we look at some questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first question that she poses, B'meh moder Rabbi Yossi Haglili l'Tana Kama u'b'mehu cholek alav. So Rabbi Yossi Haglili, that middle opinion, in what ways does he agree with that first opinion? What way does he disagree? The first opinion, recall, the anonymous first opinion in this passage, in this midrash, says that we only should show honor to the elderly who are also wise. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says,
through the interpretation of the Malbim.
Through the prism of the Malbim, let's go that direction. He says that we show really both. We are so I guess he agrees with the Tana Kama, with that first opinion, that we honor only those elderly people who are also wise and deserving of that honor through the content of their wisdom, and also we show honor to young people who are who are wise.
And that actually, when the verse uses this language of seva and zaken, so seva comes to teach us about the elderly also wise, but that the thrust of the verse is much more about wisdom than it is really about age, and it's just age as one way of acquiring wisdom, but not the unique way or exclusive way of acquiring wisdom. That's the argument of Rabbi Yossi Haglili.
Yeah. And her second question, what Isi Ben Yehuda, that third opinion that we should rise for any elderly person, how is he different from that second opinion? So the second, his disagreement is quite obvious, because Rabbi Isi Ben Yehuda says, any old person, you stand up. Somebody, that's why you stick that sticker on the bus, really should say, according to Isi Ben Yehuda, any older person gets on the bus, get up, let them have their seat, or they walk past, stand up in honor to them, even if they don't need a seat, but you should stand up anyway. So that's certainly a difference in the earlier two opinions. Does he agree that you should stand as well for a young person who's wise? I think it's
he doesn't learn it out of this verse. Let's say it like that. I think he's saying there's a funny way in which the Tanna Kama and Isi Ben Yehuda agree, even though they say completely opposite things. Which is that they both read the verse as a unity. There's these two clauses that they read as one rule. So for the Tanna Kama, that rule is wise and old. For Isi Ben Yehuda, that rule is just old. But neither of them have, in the way that Rabbi Yossi Haglili does, of each clause is coming to teach
Seva and Zaken teach us something different. Very good. Yeah, that's true. Her third question, so which of these three is actually the most demanding? Which is the strictest in its imposition on us to rise before and show honor to those people? The
question is whether you think there's more wise people or more old people.
Right. So I guess if you think that, right.
But if you think every old person is actually a wise person, right, you could read Rabbi Yossi Haglili as saying every old person is a wise person, and in addition you have to stand up for young people who happen to be wise. I think you could read Rabbi Yossi. I'm not 100% convinced of this, but I wonder, and in that case, that would for sure be the most machmir, because that's every old people and wise young people.
Yes.
And I think that's more or less the practice.
That certainly should be the practice. I think it's appropriate to stand. I think we've talked about this in other contexts. If you had a teacher who really hammered this into us, and I try to gently hammer it into other people as well. At a wedding, there's a practice which is not an old practice. It did not have people who, you speak to people who went to weddings 20, 30 years ago, this did not happen. 40 years ago, this did not happen. That when the bride and groom walk down the aisle at Orthodox weddings, everyone stands as they walk down the aisle. I think that was not done a generation or two ago. And that's fine. Okay, it's okay there's nothing wrong, I don't think, in standing when the bride and groom walk down the aisle. But really, there's a halakhic obligation, probably, to stand when the grandparents walk down the aisle. Like, they're the ones who that's a mitzvah. And when elderly people pass by, we should stand in their presence. And the practice also is to stand for people who are wise. If you in yeshivot, when teachers walk into the room, the students stand as they walk into the room, and that's something that I think is we find that in Orthodox culture. When Torah scholars pass by, people rise in deference to them, and they don't necessarily have to be very particularly old for that to happen.
You know what's funny is that it's not just a piece of Orthodox culture. Like in a court, when the judge walks in secular courts, right, all rise. That's a thing. Ethan and I watch a lot of like political TV shows, and when the president walks into a room in the West Wing, let's say, everyone stands up. Yeah. And it's funny because it kind of seems like it would be one of those like quirky Orthodox things, but it actually does play out in secular culture in these like very specific environments.
I'm not getting too far afield from our lesson to come. I think sadly, I think there's in my opinion, too few environments where we have that sense of like hadar, of like real glory and honor. And I guess we preserve it in the court situation, where we do a lot of like the judge and sitting up on high and a bench, and there's a lot that's done to create this gravitas of the moment. And I guess in certain, clearly hierarchical situations like the president or in military settings, you stand and salute, right? Where we give honor to people based on their accomplishments or the role that they have to play for a sort of social situation to unfold appropriately. And I think we could do well with more of it. When I came to yeshiva after high school, I went to a public high school where I had some wonderful teachers and also some terrible teachers. Some teachers who
crazy.
The union regulations didn't allow the school to select necessarily all of the best teachers always, and actually you have some teachers who are very. This is also true in yeshivas. You have people who are very effective teachers and very intelligent people who are also can be immoral and criminals, and that was actually a problem at my high school.
Oh, no.
Anyway, leaving behind that setting where I had several teachers whom I had tremendous admiration for, but it wasn't a universal feeling. And to come to yeshiva, where I did have admiration for all of my teachers, I really felt great pride in standing when the faculty of the yeshiva would walk into the classroom before giving shiur, and it was a sense of I felt it added importance and value to what I was doing as a student, that we were studying something really, really important, so important that the people who are teaching me this, like they deserve to have everyone stand when they walk into the room.
I think in general, Israel, like I remember even, I lived in Israel for a year when I was in 5th grade, and we would refer to our teachers in the third person. Does the teacher think this? Hamorach Choshevet, blah, blah, blah. And just the idea of like reverence in Israeli education society, for all that, there's plenty to critique about Israeli education, but that particular thing I think is very, very strong, and that we could do more of it in America. But I wanted to also just transition back to the elderly a little bit, because I think this vision of an old person walks in and you assume that their years have given them incredible knowledge, and that therefore we should, because of their age and because of the wisdom that comes with age, give them this kind of reverence, is so foreign from, like, I think standard American culture. And even, meaning, I was just sitting in on this whole talk about elder abuse and how rampant it is, and kind of how divergent is that reality from what the Torah commands of us in terms of respect for the elderly. And this was about watching out to make sure that people's finances aren't taken advantage of, that people's bodies aren't taken advantage of with the vulnerabilities of old age, and to say, okay, like this person's like gashmias, maybe their physicality is kind of vulnerable in this way, but their intellect has gained so much over time, and because of that we should be according them incredible respect, is like a really important message of the Torah that comes up in this week's parsha.
We've avoided the fourth question because it's the hardest one.
Yes.
The fourth question is Hatuchal Azbir Lama Bachrat Torah Bechatziav Rishon Shal Pasuk B'Shem Etzem Mufshat Seva V'lo Amra I guess save or ish seva ubachra bechetz sheni shal pasuk b'shem etzem muchshi zaken v'lo b'shem etzem mufshat zikna. So she uses grammatical terms which I'm not fully familiar with, but I think I understand the point that she's making. Seva is would translate really as old age, rise before old age in the first half of the verse, and the second half of the verse we're showing honor to the elderly, right? It's a person, it's an individual in the second half of the verse, whereas in the first half of the verse it's a concept. It's a concept. Yeah. So these are two types of nouns, right? Which again I don't have a grammatical vocabulary in Hebrew, but that is what she's. And that's a really interesting observation, and I don't think I have an answer.
Well, I do think that, meaning, I don't know if this is the right answer, but it like spurs a thought in me, which is that we have reverence for really old things that are not old people. Like just the like state of oldness inspires something. I think like you go to a museum and you see something that's like, from the Second Temple period or the Stone Age, right? You go to, like, okay, like you go, like in Israel, you can go in the around the Carmel, you can go see stuff from the Stone Age, and like, if I were to like take a rock and like, I don't know, scribble something on a wall, no one would be like, wow, it's amazing. But the fact that thing is just so old, like really, it is like kind of inspiring, and maybe like the Torah is trying to foster that reaction through the language of seva. Like oldness should inspire something in you. Interesting. I have the beginnings of an answer, maybe in line with some of what we saw. Maybe let's say Issi Ben Yehuda's position, that the seva position, right? We're supposed to honor every elderly person, regardless of their personal circumstances and how wise they may actually be. So the Torah gives us that command in a sort of more general term, like seva, age, right? Whereas the Zaken that's somebody who is wise, whether or not they're old, and so therefore the Torah hones in and uses a word to describe an individual person whose actual characteristics
are going to be directly the cause of our treatment of him or her, right? So that could be, I guess it's just like Lily's position, right? That's we every elderly person and also the young people who are wise deserve respect, and so therefore the Torah uses a broad term to refer to old age, and then a more specific term to refer to the zaken, who is usually old, but really is somebody who is wise, and because that person might be wise beyond their years, but still earn our honor. That's
a more individual assessment, as opposed to like, how old are you? Therefore, this. You're 18, therefore you can vote. Like, therefore you're mature enough to vote. Like, I don't know, there's something like funny about that, but also kind of experientially true about that. And I think just I think what you're a little bit getting at is that it feels like Rabbi Yossi Aglili is the most explicitly careful reader of the repetitiveness of this verse, and that there's something that's very compelling about that. And it makes you kind of wonder whether, with this question, Nechama is kind of like pushing you towards Rabbi Yossi Aglili also.
At least she's telling us perhaps how he read the verse. And I think this is something that more broadly, we saw in the Malbim, he says, whenever the Torah repeats itself, it's always something different. I think that's a major difference between certainly the Malbim and many classic Torah commentaries and the assumptions of, like, say, modern biblical scholarship, where in modern biblical scholarship you have these, certainly in biblical poetry, you have all of these repeated...
And that's just the model, right? In Ha'azinu, right?
And you assume that the first half and the second half sort of mean the same thing. The second half is a poetic recapitulation of the first half. They both sort of mean the same thing. And the more traditional approach among rabbinic leaders...
Every word in the Torah, it gives us unique meaning. And, I mean, if you didn't have that principle, like, the Talmud would be half the length that it is.
Right.
Like, I don't know, some insane percentage of the Talmud is like, what uses this word over here? But why do we need that word if that's to see just that? So, there's no extra word in the Torah, therefore, whatever. It's like one of the most fundamental hermeneutic principles.
So that's strength of Yossi Aglili is that he seems to be really take, like, in this instance at least, he sort of is finding significance in both halves of the verse and the two different words that are used and the different grammatical forms those two words take, and that seems to strengthen him. So all of this is this learning that we've just were able to partake of is really the careful curation and guidance of Nechama Leibowitz and her collection of commentaries, putting them together and guiding us towards kind of discovering things that I certainly would have missed if I had just looked through any of these sources on their own without having brought them into dialogue with each other with her guiding questions.
And it's an amazing form of writing wherein, like, we just had a 20-odd minute conversation based on 4 sentences. It's like an amazing way to teach, I think, an amazing model for all of us. Thank you so much for joining us for our episode today and for listening. As always, we would like to thank our producer, Haley Leventhal, and we always love feedback. Good feedback, feel free to send us emails, tell us in person, tell your friends about it, and how amazing you feel the Straw Hat is.
And we're asking for any negative feedback to be written out on note cards and tied with ribbon to the lilac bush in front of the shul.
All right, have a good week.